Last Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock, my understanding is it did not come up at that meeting.
You're kidding.
Or there was no action taken by the Board of Commissioners at that meeting pertaining to the monitoring team.
No kidding.
And the fourth complaint involved inadequate documentation of 10 scanners allegedly used during early voting.
Oh, so the scanners.
In addition, I request that we subpoena Fulton County to appear at the next meeting.
And Fannie Willis, too. Get her butt down there, too. Fulton County, the land of Big Fannie Willis, is now getting a subpoena, and it's coming from the State Board of Elections. They had an 8-hour session yesterday, and there were some juicy tidbits inside of it. Now, a lot of it was from constituents out in Georgia who were there very upset about how the elections are being run there. Hours of that. But what we got is a nice conversation between the 5 members of the State Board, and they're identifying a problem that they've been having with Fulton County, not delivering records that they've demanded multiple times. And you can see some of these documents are the following: return sheets from the 2020 election, opening and closing scanner tapes, daily recaps of advanced in-person voting, poll pad recap sheets, electronic files of ballot images, right? Tons of files, numbers, voter lists and absentee lists, absentee ballot oath envelopes and security verification forms. And we've been paying very close attention to the absentee ballots and how they're exploiting the Uokava ballots, saying you don't have to match the dates of delivered ballots, you don't have to match the ID numbers in their manuals. In practice, happening now. They're also concerned about chain of custody forms, which are critical. You can't even get evidence admitted in a court of law without chain of custody. What do you mean? Where'd that knife come from? Where'd those blood results come from? So what we'll see is that Fulton County, they say at the State Board of Elections, they're not in compliance. And so let's run through this and break down exactly what's happening. So as we've seen before, there were electoral problems in 2020. Now, they existed way before that. We've read through federal court filings here that involved Raffensperger and others from courts in Georgia that explain specifically there were problems with security as it related to the operations of the elections. And so in 2020, one of the remedies was they were going to create a monitoring team. So in 2024, Fulton County is going to have a team of people come in and monitor the situation. And what was supposed to happen is they were going to nominate people to go and monitor Fulton County because it was a big problem last time. And we know that Fulton County is a disaster, and nobody expects Fannie Willis and Prosecutor Love to go do anything meaningful to investigate something that's not useful to them, which would be fraud that favors Trump winning or Republicans winning. They would work opposed to that. So now this guy, don't know his party affiliation, but I do believe he's a Democrat because he votes against the subpoenas that are ultimately issued. But he's talking about this monitoring team. Now, what happened is the monitoring team was agreed to by Fulton County. They said, sure, in 2020, after all that madness, sure, we'll have monitoring next time around. But next time around, the monitors need to get approved by the Board of Commissioners, right? So then they send these names over to the Board of Commissioners, and the Board of Commissioners is just slow walking the whole thing. So they just sit there and they don't take any action on the list of names, and the Board of Commissioners hearing has come and passed. And so now those new people who were supposed to be monitoring this election, that Fulton County agreed to have monitoring this election, will not be doing it because the Board of Commissioners there in Georgia has also just kind of delayed it, right? So it's incompetence, it's bureaucracy, it's whatever, but documents and implementation of the fixes that were necessary after the rigged 2020 election are not being implemented by design.
Monday, Dr. Johnson and I met with Chairwoman Sherry Allen, Chairwoman of Fulton County, and had a meeting concerning the monitoring team, and it lasted approximately 2.5 hours.
Okay.
And we discussed a number of things concerning the monitoring team, and Dr. Johnson made a proposal to Chairwoman Allen that the monitoring team be expanded, and the expansion would be 2 members selected by each member of this board to be added to the monitoring team. Dr. Johnson then quizzed the board as to who they would like to select, and 8 members were come up with.
All right, it's a
for the
bipartisan
addition.
board.
On Tuesday
On this
evening,
panel.
Dr. Johnson sent that list of additional proposed members to Chairwoman Allen, and my understanding is that no action has been taken on that as of yet. Chairwoman Allen indicated that any additions or deletions to the team or issues relating to the monitoring team would have to be voted on by the Board of Commissioners for Fulton County.
Okay.
And the Board of Commissioners were meeting on last Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock. My understanding is it did not come up at that meeting.
You're
or
kidding.
there was no action taken by the Board of Commissioners at that meeting pertaining to the monitoring team.
No kidding.
This morning, I was alerted to a legal action taken by Fulton County where a declaratory judgment was asked for relating to the monitoring team. I have not read that, the legal documents, what that that yet. I will supply it to the board my first opportunity. So I don't know legally exactly what they're asking for, what that means, but there was documents apparently that were filed this morning and should have been stamped this morning by Fulton County relating to the monitoring team.
And we'll get
So
those
that
documents
is
when they're published.
as much as I know. If you'd like to add to that, Dr. Johnson.
I don't know anymore, but I take that as a rejection
Yes.
of the additional members that were appointed by the state election board.
It's like a
to
pocket
Fulton
veto,
County's
refusing to act.
own monitor team with Mr. Ryan Germany. Just to refresh everyone here, this monitor team came about on May 7th with hearing case SEB 2023-025, a complaint by Mr. Rossi and Moncla. The case involved 4 complaints. The first complaint dealt with double counting of ballots and votes during the recount. The final
Okay, so she's giving us an explanation as to why we have this monitoring team in the first place. Well, somebody filed a case and there were 4 complaints in there, and all of these are in the problem. So then Fulton County agreed to the monitoring to settle this as part of a resolution in this case.
an official count of an election contest. The second complaint involved 17,852 missing ballot images.
That's a lot.
From the recount. The third complaint involved possible improper hiring of a Mr. Messias, a consultant from the elections group.
Oops.
And the fourth complaint involved inadequate documentation of 10 scanners allegedly used during early voting.
Oh, so the scanners.
Without adequate documentation.
Scanners
of
don't have
their actual use.
certifications.
And the 20,000 votes that were attributed to those scanners.
Bummer.
Mr. Lindsay, a former board member here, made a motion based on a pre-meeting agreement with Fulton County Board Chair and lawyer to issue a letter of reprimand and implement a monitor team for the upcoming election.
Right.
The monitor team would be agreed upon by the state election board, the Secretary of State,
Raffensperger
and Fulton County,
and Fulton.
and must be decided by the June 9th meeting. The motion was passed 2-1, and agreement was made that was not kept at the June 9th meeting. No agreement had been made for the monitor
Member
team.
Johnson, it's July 9th.
Sorry, July 9th. The Fulton County is not in compliance with that decision
Not
on
in
of May
compliance.
7th. The state election board has not approved the Ryan Germany monitor team because of multiple reasons, but a presumed conflict of interest. Fulton County is not in compliance with the Ed Lindsay motion that was passed. The letter of reprimand cited failure to comply with recount procedures. Complaint concerning early voting tabulators with missing documentation was not addressed. The complaint regarding double counting of ballots and votes was not addressed. Incomplete review of Exhibit 11 failed to explain the 17,852 missing ballot images. The complaint regarding Mr. Messias, whom Fulton County attorney hired along with the elections group to outsource the administration of election, was not addressed. State election board reached out to Fulton County multiple times to attempting to establish an acceptable monitor team. Fulton County has failed to comply with that agreed decision of May 7th.
And I just looked it up. Ryan Germany is the general counsel for Brad Raffensperger.
Failure to comply with this state election board requirement requires further investigation be considered. Fulton County has additionally had a number of cases of violations in the past couple of years, past several elections, that appear to be recurrent difficulties with election conduct. OCGA 21-233.1 states that the SEB is vested with the power to issue orders to proceed with other proceedings and investigation. I would like to make a motion to subpoena from the clerk of the court
Let's go.
additional documents. I would like to subpoena consolidated return sheets, opening and closing scanner tapes, daily recap of advance in-person voting from polling place scanners, poll pad recap sheets, electronic files of ballot images, log files, and tabulation files, the numbered voter list, the absentee list of voters, the absentee ballot envelopes, and security verification forms. And one final request is the chain of custody forms from the poll manager and technician.
This is in reference to them not fulfilling their end of the bargain. We gave them ample opportunities to work with us. We provided them with an additional list. They refused to do it. They put themselves in this position. They need to produce the documents.
With Dr. Johnson's motion is requesting documents related to the 2020 election and the 025 case. It has nothing to do with the monitoring necessarily. It's requesting documents from back then, which has nothing to do with the fulfillment of the monitoring. So,
Well, it has to do with the same same case. It's just all the same.
Right, and we've been
Okay.
advised by the Attorney General on this case.
I take his advisement and I respect it. However, I think we should proceed with the motion on the table.
That was the Georgia Attorney General, Chris Card, not
Any further
Raffensperger.
discussion?
Vote on it.
Member Johnson, would you restate your motion?
Mr. Chair, that we subpoena the clerk of the court for multiple documents from the November 2020 election, including consolidated return sheets, opening and closing scanner tapes, daily recap of advanced in-person polling place scanners, poll pad recap sheets, absentee ballot recap sheets, electronic files, including ballot images, log files, and tabulation files, a numbered voter list, absentee numbered list of voters, absentee ballot, oath envelopes, security verification forms, and chain of custody forms of the poll manager and technician. In addition, I request that we subpoena Fulton County to appear at the next meeting.
And Fannie Willis, too. Get her butt down there,
We have a
too.
motion on the table. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Let's go.
Hearing no discussion, we'll vote via a voice vote in order of seniority. Member Gazal, how do you vote?
Nay.
Member Johnson, how do you vote?
Aye.
Member Jeffries, how do you vote? Member King, how do you vote?
Aye.
The chairman reserves his right to vote and votes nay. Motion carries 3-2.
Yeah. Subpoena passes issued by the Georgia State Board of Elections. You can hear a pin drop in that room. Good work. Nice victory. And you can see how it has taken forever for them to get there. But we also have more election shenanigans in Georgia. Never let a crisis go to waste. They're here in Georgia, and they've been joined by the NAACP, and they're filing an emergency complaint demanding some relief. They say, listen, all right, the NAACP, the New People's Agenda, Georgia's People's Agenda, the New Georgia Project, we bring this emergency action to prevent widespread disenfranchisement of would-be eligible voters who are hindered from registering to vote by the October 7th deadline due to catastrophic weather beyond their control. Now, they write, Hurricane Helene hit Georgia on September 27th. It's the second deadliest hurricane, bringing historic 11 inches of rainfall. We know is bad. Massive disruptions. Communities throughout Georgia lost a bunch of power. Different counties are in a state of emergency. Massive widespread disruptions. Significant impairment of registration throughout the entire week leading up to the deadline. So they need to postpone the registration deadline. It's over. It expired on the 7th. And they say the final week is a historically popular time to register. So data from Georgia's voter files shows that Georgia historically sees a spike in registration on the very last week. For example, 57,000 people registered at the last presidential election, and now that was compared to only 36,000 the week before. Okay, so everybody waits till the last minute to turn in their homework. Now, the same pattern holds for 2022, 18, and 16. The last week is the most important week, and this is when the hurricane hit. Now, despite the tremendous destruction, this is Raffensperger and Kemp, they have failed to extend the voter registration deadline, and they've risked in disenfranchising eligible voters. And so this court should not allow a natural disaster to shut out would-be voters throughout the state from participating in our democracy. It's like verbatim to what we saw back during COVID. We can't let this pandemic shut out people who want to participate in our democracy. It's a fundamental matter in a free and democratic society. No right is more precious than voting, and the state can and should protect that right by extending the voter registration deadline to the 14th to make up for the time lost from the storm, right? So is that all? They just want to post this back 1 week? Interesting. Now, without relief, many eligible prospective voters who have faced widespread power outages, internet, loss of transportation, government services, and others will be disenfranchised. Now, the NAACP, they say, is a nonpartisan, interracial, nonprofit membership organization, and they've long worked on these issues. They've been forced to cancel even some of their events where Hurricane Helene made landfall. And so if this deadline is not extended, the NAACP will be prevented from carrying out its core mission, which is getting a bunch of people registered. Now, the Georgia Coalition also represents more than 5,000 people, and they've got a bunch of field offices, and they were not able to register people either. They conduct voter registration activities, and so these internet outages made it difficult for them to do this. Same thing here. For the Georgia Project, they weren't able to go door to door to get all their people registered, and so now we need to extend the deadline. Because of Hurricane Helene, they've not been able to complete its voter registration activities, and so they need an extension to go finish the job. Now, the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, is responsible for implementing the elections. That's why he's named in this complaint. Now, the court has jurisdiction over it, and the Voter Rights Registration Act says that people can submit their registrations, and the law requires that they're open during business days, and the deadline is on the 7th. But if we recognize the potential impact and if we recognize the fact that the governor declared an emergency just 7 business days before the voter registration deadline, they're going to say that those days should count. So open up registration again. Georgians experienced massive destruction statewide, and then the Georgia Supreme Court issued a statewide judicial emergency order. And so all of these things are an emergency, and so we should have more time. 1.3 million households suffered outages, 300 roadways were made impassable, 33 people lost their lives, rest in peace. Georgia Power Company also got hit. It disrupted all options for registering to vote, and so now they've experienced internet outages. And even now, October 3rd, 6 days after the hit, they were still without power. And as of October 6th, there were still 11,000 outages, and so the damage was obviously massive. Now, the closing of many election offices means that Georgians couldn't register in person. At least 37 county election boards were closed, and so we've got to get these things extended. In fact, on Bullock County on their Facebook page, they said that we're down. The governor has refused, despite all of this, to coordinate with these offices to extend the voter registration deadline, despite acknowledging Helene's devastation. And by the way, if the governor came out and extended the deadlines, he says, you know, this is an emergency, he said, and extended it, he'd probably be sued by these same people for doing that, just to be clear. Hurricane Helene also badly disrupted mail-in voter registration in Georgia, and the Postal Service suspended mail services. We're going to keep our eye on that one too. In 8 postal facilities, all operations were suspended. In 3 of the postal facilities, all operations were suspended in that county. Losing access to voter registration during the final week is particularly injurious to voters. People's ballots just get blown out of the water, get blown away, or their registration forms. Interest in an election tends to grow as we get closer. In the last election year, 57,000 people registered the final week. So they're saying there's like about 20-ish thousand people in, the final week, more than the second to the final week. And so now maybe we've lost about that many people. Moreover, 1,400 prospective voters also submitted voter registrations after Hurricane Matthew in 2016. And we also had to cancel a bunch of activities. And so the closure of several boards of elections and more all had to happen all across these counties. NAACP was forced to cancel at least 10 registrations. A significant number of minority voters were affected. You can see here, according to the Georgia Election Hub database, several counties with significant Black populations were impacted. Burke, 46% of the county is Black. Chatham, 40% of the county is Black. Lincoln, 26%. Lowndes, 38%. McDuffie, 40%, and more. So the governor emphasized that this was a catastrophe, but they're not extending registration. How come? The governor was notified that several counties that were impacted were without power, and that the Postal Service suspended mail service to 42 counties, but they still didn't extend it. And Kemp has refused to extend the registration deadline, and so they're not going to be able to vote. And so, as we can see, the first claim is saying that they violated the First and the 14th Amendments, due process and equal protection of the law. The deadline imposes a severe burden on the right to vote. People were impacted by the hurricane, and the state cannot show why they shouldn't extend this. There's no sufficient reason for them to not extend it. And they're also alleging a violation of federal law, saying the law says enhance eligible citizens and their ability to vote. And so we're not supposed to have people disenfranchised. Hurricane Helene significantly impaired or foreclosed the ability to register, and Kemp is refusing to extend this. And because it impaired Georgia voters, it should be remedied. And here's what they're asking for. Enter a judgment against Georgia and say that if they don't extend the voter registration deadline, they're violating the Constitution, and grant the relief that we're demanding here. Discontinue enforcement of the current registration deadline, extend the registration deadline up through October 14th, or in the alternative, if that comes up, discontinue enforcement of the current registration deadline and extend the registration deadline by all methods, including online, in-person, mail-in for all counties that experience widespread or prolonged outages, internet outages, postal service disruptions, election office closures, and more, all to October 14th. And then issue an order telling that the government that Kemp needs to pay for all this and do whatever else you need to do. Signed by the ACLU Foundation, NAACP, and other attorneys from various organizations. So they're all trying to extend this by about a week up to October 14th. Now, by the time we get to the 14th, you ask yourself, well, how many ballots were ultimately turned in? And I guess the question would be, how many are just boxed up somewhere that were postmarked after the deadline that they can add in? And all these organizations maybe are seeing something in their numbers, like our registration numbers are way down, so we have to get out to vote. Now, the Republican Party is intervening intervening on this. So the RNC has responded. They're saying, wait a minute, we're prepared to intervene. They say Georgia is challenging the election laws. And during a recent challenge, the court has always allowed political committees to intervene. That's us. So allow us to intervene from the RNC. And I guess they were allowed to intervene. And that was a very short filing. And so we'll keep our eye on it. But as you can see, a lot of shenanigans happening out in Fulton County. And Steve Sadow, Trump's defense attorney, also posted this on X. He said, you know, Fani Willis's campaign filing shows that the campaign paid out more than $169,000 to an Atlanta company called Public Service Partners Limited over the last 3 months, and that the vast majority of the campaign donations came from outside of Georgia. Isn't that very curious? People from out of state are pouring money into Fani's coffers. Curious. Public Service Partners Limited. Kind of has a Nathan Wade vibe to it, right? Or a Hunter Biden vibe. Maybe they're working together now, indicting more government people. All right, so that's what's happening in Georgia. Thanks for subscribing and following as we do.